Hey everyone, and welcome to my review of Tormented Souls. All the gameplay you'll see in this video was captured on a PS5 console, but the game's also available on Xbox Series consoles and PC, with the last gen and Switch version releasing later on. Also, a review code was provided to me by the publisher. One quick thing that I do need to mention is that just like my last review, which was Aliens Fireteam Elite, this review was put together using a mixture of my friends' experience with the game, their opinions on the game, and my opinions as someone who's looked over hours of footage. Of course, that means I can't personally comment on how it feels to play. However, I can comment on visuals, sound, some of the mechanics, and things like that. Once again, thanks to TaylorMade Gaming for the help with this one, as I wouldn't have been able to make it without him. If you're wondering why I didn't personally play this myself, I'll have a video linked below that will explain everything. And of course, remember, if you enjoy this video or find it useful, please do consider subscribing to the channel. We're really close to that 1,000 subscriber milestone, and we can only reach it with your help. So what is Tormented Souls? Well, it's a survival horror game that was clearly inspired by classics of the past such as Alone in the Dark, Silent Hill, and Resident Evil. You play as a young girl named Caroline Walker, who's trying to track down twin girls who've gone missing. Her investigation leads her to an old, abandoned mansion, within which you'll be solving classic Resident Evil-style puzzles and fending off weird creatures as you progress through the story. When you first gain control of Caroline, you'll very quickly notice that the game uses the traditional fixed camera view and pre-rendered backgrounds combination. The developers have taken the time to modernize it for present-day players, however, by creating proper 3D backgrounds that are affected by light sources and stick out in a realistic way. Unlike older pre-rendered backgrounds, which were essentially flat images with some collision detection that a character could walk around. Early on, you'll have access to a nail gun as a ranged weapon and a crowbar for melee if you run low on ammo. Later on, you will of course find other things to use, but make no mistake, you are far from powerful. The game does actually make use of the old tank controls, where pressing up on the D-pad will move you forward whichever way your character is facing, and the left and right buttons will turn you around. However, you can also use the analog sticks to move around in any direction, but you'll need to make sure you account for the camera angle changes when doing so. The creepy old mansion has a lot of light and dark areas to explore, but if Caroline strays into the darkness for too long, the shadows will take her away and provide you with an instant death. As you play through the game, you will be able to illuminate some of the dark areas by switching on generators. Normally, you'll be carrying around a lighter to find your way around, but the problem is you can't fight while you have the lighter out, so turning on the generators makes it much easier to fight back in certain areas of the mansion. You do have access to a backwards dodge to get you out of harm's way, which you'll probably need as you can't move while aiming your weapons. The controls and movement are usually designed like this to help with tension and to make you feel more vulnerable. Now, this is an indie game, and a playthrough can be finished in around, I would say, 5 to 7 hours if you have literally no idea where to go, but a second playthrough could probably be done in around 4 hours. But as I said, it is a smaller game, and honestly there isn't much more to say about it, so let's get into the personal opinion stuff, starting with the positives. So the first thing I want to mention here is that the atmosphere and sense of dread that the game gives off is absolutely brilliant in my opinion. It feels genuinely creepy in places and very faithful to what most people would argue was the golden era of survival horror. I just think it's a modern take on games like Silent Hill or Resident Evil, albeit a budget one. And I sincerely hope that this game sells well, because I can only imagine what these developers would be able to produce with a much higher budget and more staff. Another thing I quite liked about the game was the design of the monsters and creatures that you fight. A lot of them are just very odd and honestly quite unsettling to look at. One enemy in particular was pretty awful, but funnily enough very appropriate. The enemy I'm talking about is simply called the Wheel Monster. The official website states that these creatures were elderly people with dementia who were abandoned by their relatives, and with no one to care for them or look after them, they ended up being subjected to horrible experiments. Their eyes were removed and a tuning fork was placed inside their heads. That tuning fork now sends sound vibration directly to their brains so that they can pounce directly towards anything that makes a noise. So yeah, not very nice, but definitely very apt for a game like this. Lastly, in this section, I'd really like to mention the performance on PS5. The game plays pretty much flawlessly and runs at 4K 60 FPS and doesn't really struggle to do so. It looks really nice in 4K for what it is, runs at a very stable frame rate, and I had no crashes or glitches to speak of. All in all, I was honestly very impressed with its performance. And so that's most of the positive opinions out the way, so let's move on to some negatives. The first negative point I want to bring up is that when I was in combat, there was quite a few times where it felt like my hits weren't registering on some of the enemies. I'm not 100% sure if or how this was happening, but when I used the nail gun, for example, my character would shoot directly at the enemy, and it would sometimes act like nothing had happened. I suppose this could simply be the game flat out not registering the hit, or it could be that the hit landed but the game provided no visual or audio feedback to confirm it. Either way, it made a few sections a bit annoying because I felt like I was wasting ammo on stuff. I mean, maybe the enemies have iframes when they do certain animations, I'm not really sure, but I'm just pointing it out because that's how it seemed at the time. Also, don't get me wrong, it wasn't constant by any stretch of the imagination, it was just on random occasions. The next negative for me was to do with some of the puzzles. Now, I've played many of the titles that this game clearly draws inspiration from, which includes older games and more recent ones. I'm no stranger to the types of puzzles that you need to solve to progress in these kind of games. When it comes to Tormented Souls though, I thought that a few of the puzzles, not all of them, but a few of them were designed in a way that didn't make them clever, but kind of made them obtuse. As a couple of examples, you could find an item right near the start of the game that you wouldn't need for ages, so you're constantly looking for where it goes, only to find out that you simply can't use it until later. And there was one particular puzzle that required you to walk around a corpse anti-clockwise with the lights off with your lighter equipped. In all fairness, there was a minor clue given to you, but it's one of those situations where you're looking for a specific item or a place to slot an item, so walking around a corpse in that way just seemed really abstract and just kind of out of place to me. Once again though, to be fair, some people may consider it clever and interesting, but I personally just found it a little bit weird. The last negative I want to mention is a relatively small thing, but the older tank control scheme definitely doesn't hold up in the modern day. I get that they wanted to be faithful to the traditional style, and that they have added the newer control stick method, but it just doesn't feel that great to control in my opinion. And of course that's just how I feel about it, and you may really like the tank controls and want them due to the fact that that's how they used to do it, but for me I just found it a little awkward. Don't get me wrong though, it's not unplayable at all, far from it in fact, and you may feel completely different about it. And if that's the case, then I completely understand, but I personally would have liked the devs to take a bigger swing at modernizing the controls than they actually ended up doing. And honestly that's about it for the negatives, so let's move on to the conclusion and recommendation. Tormented Souls is a very good attempt by a small indie studio to recreate and modernize the classic survival horror formula. In my opinion, it succeeds far more often than it fails to produce a game that genuinely feels creepy and plays to the strengths of the games that it tries to emulate. Besides a little bit of random jankiness here and there, it has everything you'd want or need from a survival horror game of this style. I think if you've ever been a fan of the genre, you know, tank controls, pre-rendered backgrounds, elaborate puzzles and limited ammo, that kind of stuff, then I can easily recommend this game to you. I mean, if you like the old school Silent Hills, Resident Evils and Alone in the Darks, I really do think you'll enjoy this. Granted, it does have a slight rough edge to it, but it's easily overlooked. For the players out there looking for a much more in-depth or perhaps more up-to-date horror experience like The Evil Within, or perhaps things like the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, you may simply just find this game to be not interesting enough. Although having said that, I think it might be a kind of 50-50 thing. A lot of people can and do enjoy both types of game, but some people may only be looking for one or the other. In that case, I would just suggest looking up as many reviews as reasonably possible and then trying to figure out where your interest lies. And of course, if you're just a fan of horror games in general, I can quite easily recommend this to you and say that it's definitely worth a look. I don't think the game's story will pull you in, but I think that the great lighting and unsettling atmosphere probably will. And another thing that's worth mentioning here at the end is that the game doesn't outstay its welcome by bloating its runtime or padding itself out, and could probably be finished in maybe 1 or 2 evenings worth of play. So there you go, that's the review for Tormented Souls, an indie love letter to the bygone days of traditional survival horror. It's available right now on PS5, Xbox Series consoles and PC, with the previous generation and Switch versions coming at a later date. If you just want to grab the game digitally, it's only around £16 in the UK and $20 in the US, so it won't exactly break the bank. There is a physical copy for the PS5 available, but it's around £30 in the UK and $40 in the US, so you do have that choice. Thanks again to TaylorMade Gaming for the help in creating this review. I wouldn't have been able to produce it without him. If you have any further questions about the game, please feel free to head to the comments section and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you enjoy the video or find it useful, a subscription to the channel would be much appreciated, and if you want to support the channel in any other way, all the important links are in the video description down below. But with all that said, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.